Welcome to Module 3 of Grammar Fundamentals for a Pluralistic Society. My name is Kate Crowley from the Program of Speech-Language Pathology at Teachers College, Columbia University. I've created these modules with my co-author, Chad Grossman. This module will outline some morphosyntactic features of American English dialects relating to the use of verbs. Verbs describe an action, state of being, or occurrence. And they have to reflect the person and number expressed by the subject. We have the first person, I or we, second person, you or you all, and the third person, he, she, it, or they. Do you see any inflectional morphemes here? Bingo! Here's our third person singular S inflectional morpheme. Generally speaking, there are main verbs and auxiliary or helping verbs. Main verbs are the primary descriptors of an action, state of being, or occurrence. For example, Tim sings opera, or they play football. Auxiliary verbs, on the other hand, clarify the action, state of being, or occurrence described by the main verb. So, Tim is singing opera. A modal auxiliary is a type of auxiliary verb that indicates modality, that is, it expresses obligation, certainty, doubt, or likelihood. Common modal auxiliaries include can, may, will, shall, and should. In the sentence, they can play football, can is acting as a modal auxiliary. I want to talk about be verbs for a moment. Be verbs can take many forms such as I am, they are, he is, you were, he was, and so on. The be verb can serve as an auxiliary verb, or it can serve as a main verb. When it serves as a main verb, we call it a copula. Here are examples of the copular be. He is cool, and the window was open. In each of these cases, be is acting as the main verb. Here are some examples of the verb be serving as an auxiliary verb. He is running the marathon. They are going home. So in these cases, the auxiliary form of be is clarifying the action, state of being, or occurrence that's described by the main verb. There are also two different categories of be verbs, contractable and uncontractable. With contractable be verbs, you can form a contraction with a verb. So he is can contract to form he's, as in he's running, and I am can contract to form I'm, as in I'm happy. Uncontractable verbs cannot be contracted. For example, if we take the past tense, he was running, we can't contract the verb was without losing its meaning. He's running provides no indication that it happened in the past. Similarly, if you're answering the question, who is happy, with he is, you can't contract the verb into he's. One way to organize verbs is by their transitive or intransitive nature. Transitive verbs must have an object or something receiving the action or state of being. He plays what? He plays tennis. They like what? They like cake. Intransitive verbs, on the other hand, don't need an object to receive an action. They can stand alone, like she sneezes or he dreams. Let's get some practice. So, he smells. Transitive or intransitive? Intransitive. It doesn't need an object to receive an action. It can stand alone. What about he smelled the garbage? It's transitive. The verb has an object or something receiving the action or state of being. Verbs can also vary in tense or how they express time. There are three basic tenses in Standard American English: past, present, and future. Past tense verbs express actions, states of being, or occurrences that have happened in the past. Present tense verbs express actions, states of being, or occurrences that are happening now, and future tense expresses actions, states of being, or occurrences that will happen. Each verb tense, past, present, or future, can take on three different forms called the simple, progressive, and perfect forms. Let's start with the past first. The simple past expresses actions, states of being, or occurrences that happened and finished happening in the past. In expressing tense, verbs usually change their spelling and take on a different form. Here we have what's called the regular past tense because you take the verb stem, usually the first or second person form of the verb, and you add the inflectional morpheme ed. So, he played chess yesterday. There are also irregular past tense verbs such as run. It would be incorrect to take the verb stem run and add an ed to get runned. Rather, you have to know that the verb run has an irregular past tense form, which is ran, as in, he ran yesterday. The past progressive form expresses actions, states, or occurrences that were in progress or continuous over a period of time in the past. It's formed by combining the auxiliary verbs was or were, depending on the subject's person and number, with what is called the present participle, which is formed by adding the inflectional morpheme ing to the verb stem. So play becomes was playing, as in he was playing chess when his mom called. The past perfect form expresses actions, states, or occurrences that happened before a particular action or event in the past, as in he had reviewed his notes before he took the exam. The past perfect is formed by combining the auxiliary verb had with the past participle. So here we combine the auxiliary verb had with the past participle of review, which is reviewed. The past participle can often look like the simple past, particularly with regular past tense verbs like review, where you add an ed to the verb stem to form reviewed. However, it can look different with irregular past tense verbs where different spellings are used. For example, the past tense form of the verb eat is ate, but the past participle of eat is eaten, as in he had eaten the cake before anyone had a chance to get a slice, which is another example of the past perfect tense. Moving on to the present. The simple present expresses actions, states of beings, or occurrences that exist now. For example, I play chess. The present progressive expresses actions, states, or occurrences that are currently still happening. It's formed by combining auxiliary be words like am, is, or are with the present participle. For example, I am playing chess. The present perfect expresses actions, states, or occurrences that were initiated in the past and have just been completed or continue up until this present moment. It's formed by combining have or has, depending on the subject's person and number, with the past participle. For example, she has won the race. Moving on to the future. The simple future expresses actions, states of being, or occurrences that will happen in a particular time in the future. It's formed by combining the auxiliary verb will with a main verb. So for example, I will play chess next Tuesday. The future progressive expresses actions, states, or occurrences that will be continuously happening in the future. It's formed by combining the words will be with the present participle. So for example, I will be playing chess every day next week. The future perfect expresses actions, states, or occurrences that will be completed before a particular action or event in the future. It's formed by combining the words will have with the past participle. For example, by the time we get there, we will have missed the train. A verb's voice refers to whether that verb's subject is doing the action or receiving the action. In the active voice, the subject is said to be the performer of the action. For example, in the sentence, Stephen directed the movie, Stephen is the performer of the action. He directed the movie. In the passive voice, on the other hand, the action is performed on the subject. For example, the movie was directed by Stephen. Notice the presence of the auxiliary verb was in the passive voice. The infinitive is formed by combining to plus a verb, as in he is coming to help us bake a cake. We can also have something called a bare infinitive where the to is absent, as in help me open the window. A gerund refers to a verb that acts as a noun or pronoun. It's formed by the present participle. Remember, you form the present participle by adding the inflectional morpheme ing to a verb stem. So we take the verb stem run and add ing to form the gerund running. In both of these sentences, running is my favorite sport and I like running. Running is acting as a noun or pronoun. In African American English, the past tense ed inflectional morpheme is non-obligatory. So you might find an utterance like, yesterday he played ball. Remember, this sentence is perfectly grammatical in this dialect. The regular third person singular s inflectional morpheme is also not obligatory, as in, he run every day. It's also non-obligatory in irregular third person singular verbs such as do. One reason why the third person singular s inflectional morpheme is omitted is because the s is redundant. We already know that a he is doing the running or good working because it's already described by the subject he. In African American English, there is also presence of the habitual be, which refers to a continuous action, like he'd be working all day. Further, contractible forms of copular and auxiliary be verbs are not obligatory. This is an important point. The is in he is happy is contractible. It would be grammatically correct to say he's happy. So in African American English, it's acceptable to omit the copular be and say he's happy. He happy. Was, however, is not a contractible form. Remember, you can't say he's happy when discussing the past. He was happy. So this form of the be verb is uncontractible, and therefore it would not be consistent with the grammar of African American English to omit it. In African American English, you might also see the use of double modals as in I might can go. There is also something called leveling to is, which is when the plural form of be is conjugated in the third person singular form. In standard American English, one might say they are at home, but in African American English, it's grammatically correct to level to or use the third person singular form of be. So you could have a sentence like they is home. Similarly, the third person singular past tense form of be is was. Therefore, it would be grammatically correct in African American English to say, we was there. Another feature of African American English is have auxiliary reduction, where the auxiliary form of have can be omitted. In standard American English, one might use the auxiliary form of have to say, she has been depressed. In African American English, however, it's grammatically correct to say, she been depressed. You might also see multiple negation, as in an utterance like, nobody ain't never kissed me. Ain't can also be used as a negative marker, as in, I ain't coming. There is also a feature called the existential they or existential it, where the words it and they are used to mark the existence of something. So, it was a lot of them doing it, or they was food in the fridge. Finally, African American English demonstrates a feature called quotative say, which is used to introduce a quotation, as in, yesterday I bumped into Tina and she say, hi. In Spanish influenced English, the past tense ed inflectional morpheme is not obligatory. So an utterance like, yesterday I choked on pretzel is grammatically correct in Spanish influenced English. Also, the future tense can be marked by a combination of the words go and to. So, tomorrow I go to her house. This comes from the Spanish, mañana me voy a su casa. In standard American English, one would use the auxiliary verb will to indicate future tense, as in, tomorrow I will go to her house. The third person singular s inflectional morpheme is also not obligatory. So he eat a lot of food is a grammatically correct utterance in Spanish influenced English. No can be used in negation as I no like cheese, which comes from Spanish no me gusta el queso. There is also double negation as in I no like nothing, which comes from the Spanish no me gusta nada. In Chinese-influenced English, this past tense ed inflectional morpheme is not obligatory. So you might see an utterance like, we play yesterday. You can also have an overgeneralization of the ed inflectional morpheme. Remember, run is one of our irregular past tense verbs in Standard American English. The past tense form of run is ran. Adding the ed inflectional morpheme to form the past tense ran is an overgeneralization of that rule. There is also limited noun-verb agreement. In Standard American English, we need to have noun-verb agreement, so in the third person singular, you would need the third person singular s inflectional morpheme to form he plays tomorrow. In Chinese-influenced English, noun-verb agreement may be limited, so you can have an utterance like he play tomorrow. This is a clear example of why using some of the standard means of assessment, such as MLU calculation, and looking for the presence of certain morphemes can be inappropriate when assessing the language of culturally and linguistically diverse populations. An L or monolingual child growing up in a Chinese community who says he played tomorrow might be identified as having a language disorder when really they're appropriately using the language they've been exposed to in their speech community. Also, remember that these features are not limited to ELLS. They might also be present in monolingual speakers growing up in these speech communities. Another feature of Chinese-influenced English is omission of B verbs, both copular and auxiliary. So in I going to work, the auxiliary B verb am has been omitted. Further, B verbs may be inflected differently. So in Standard American English, one would say, I am going to the store, but in Chinese-influenced English, another form of B might be used as in, I is going to store. Can you spot another dialectal feature in this utterance? Here we also have omission of the article before the noun store, which is another feature of Chinese-influenced English. There is also use of no for negation, as in, you know like. All right, it's quiz time. Let's take a quiz to assess our understanding. What's happening here? Yesterday he played soccer. What do you think? Here we have omission of the past tense ed inflectional morpheme. In Standard American English it would be he played soccer. What's happening in he eat a lot? Here we have omission of the third person singular s inflectional morpheme. In Standard American English, it would be, he eats a lot. What about the next one? I don't like nothing. Here we have double negation. And how about, he's sick? We have omission of the contractible copula. In Standard American English, it would be, he is sick. And finally, he be playing all day. Here we have the use of the habitual be. Dialect alert. You knew it was coming, didn't you? In what dialects might omission of the past tense ed inflectional morpheme be grammatically correct? That's right. In African American English, Spanish-influenced English, and Chinese-influenced English. What about omission of the third person singular s inflectional morpheme? What dialects? We might also find that in African American English, Spanish-influenced English, and Chinese-influenced English. And double negation? We might see that in African American English and Spanish-influenced English. And what about omission of the contractible copula? That's a feature of African American English and Chinese-influenced English. Finally, what about use of habitual be? That's a feature of African American English. Good work. This concludes Module 3 of Grammar Fundamentals for a Pluralistic Society.